Just Energy with naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theories that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swing of a pendulum to the waves in the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. In the same way, things such as rocks and minerals vibrate very slowly and at speeds that are imperceptible to us. Living things such as plants, animals, and man vibrate faster and appear to be alive. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is if we take everything in our own universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita as she explores questions such as, what are we made of? Why do we get sick? How can I live a more balanced and whole life? Call in and talk to her and her thought-provoking guests. Send us your questions and get the help you need to move beyond any obstacle or challenges that may be affecting your life, right from the source. So stay tuned and explore your possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. To keep informed of the upcoming show schedule, please do visit www.justenergyradio.com and sign up for our online newsletter. Also, if you go to the Just Energy Radio website, you can access over 4 years of show archives for free. That's F-R-E-E. Free, and listen to our excellent programming that we have here at Just Energy Radio. One quick announcement before I bring on our first guest. In 2 weeks, April 9th, I will be in Jefferson, Texas. That's Spooksville, USA, especially as far as Texas is concerned, at the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference, where I'll be speaking on the use of psychics and intuitives as part of a paranormal investigation. But it's a very fun event. They have speakers all day. They have a ghost walk in the evening, as well as ghost investigations into a number of locations in the Jefferson area. So if you're in Texas or Louisiana or even Arkansas, please do come to Jefferson and check out the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference. It really is a lot of fun. So we have two guests on the show today. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with Lucy Wyatt, who's been on the show before. We had some technical difficulties during that show, and we're trying it again. And we're going to be speaking today about what the ancients have taught us. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking to Orna Ben-Shoshan about the 72 names of God. So let me tell you a little bit about Lucy and get her on the air. After studying international relations and Italian at university, Lucy Wyatt went on to work for the National Economic Development Office, then in commercial design and marketing within Sir Terence Conran's empire, and followed this by editing a business magazine for a firm of City of London stockbrokers. That's quite a career. Lucy Wyatt comes from an illustrious family of mathematicians, architects, and writers, and herself has a lifelong fascination for the ancient past and the political and economic realities of the bigger picture. She lives with her family on an eco farm in Suffolk, where she puts much of what she has learned from her research into practice. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio the author of Approaching Chaos, Lucy Wyatt. Hi, Lucy. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Rita. I'm good. And you?
I am doing wonderful, and thank you for coming back on the show. And I think we're going to be technical difficulty free. I'm just going to put out that really good positive intention around our time together.
Yeah, I agree. Let's hope so.
Lucy, let's start here. How did you become interested in ancient Egypt? I mean, you've done so many different things, and now a book about ancient civilizations. How did that come about?
I know it wasn't expected. I can tell you that. No, it started really more than 10 years ago with an interest in alternative medicine, particularly homeopathy. When my youngest child started school, I decided to take some time and do some research. And I thought if I went back to the origins of particularly homeopathy, I'd get back to the ancient Greeks, and I thought I'd find out how that came to become known as non-scientific, because I didn't believe that was really true. But as I researched more and more, I realized there was a bigger story to tell about civilization and about origins of things, and I went much, much further back in time after that. So that really was my starting point, and it was taking an interest in the scientific, non-scientific aspect of things at that moment, and then realizing that actually it's just not what we've been taught, just doesn't stack up.
I find it interesting that there are many people that say, well, herbology or some of the ancient medicinal crafts that were practiced, back in the day, weren't scientific, and they had no value.
Yeah.
But they had value.
Of course they did. Of course they did, because they had a completely different understanding of science, and this is really a big problem for us in our modern day, because we have a very narrow understanding of what science means. I mean, science comes from a Latin word, "scio," I know, is what it is to do with knowledge. I know is what the word comes from, and we've also narrowed it down to this ridiculous testing method, where everything has to be repeatable, transparent, and all the rest of it. And you have to be objective and take your feelings out of it, no emotion. But actually, there's more to it than that. And in fact, modern day quantum physics doesn't fit that traditional narrow definition. And I think the ancients had a much broader understanding. I think they were much more intuitive in line with quantum physics than we give them credit for.
Oh, I agree. When I look at ancient traditions like acupuncture or things like that, it just makes me marvel that these people, these primitives that just barely got out of a cave, could have such a deep and profound understanding of the physical body as well as the spiritual or subtle body systems.
Exactly. I mean, that, I think, is one of the really key differences, isn't it? Is the fact is they take into account the psyche, they take into account the soul, they take into account the emotional well-being of the individual. And when they were carrying out healing, they realized the importance of nutrition and things like that, and the importance of how you live in a psychic, mental kind of way. These even if you had a physical illness, they understood the balance between the two. And this is a whole area of treatment that the modern day advances don't really necessarily take into account. We have to put up with ghastly side effects from our therapeutic treatments.
And one of the things, I'm an energy worker, and one of the things that I find very interesting is how we, as an advanced civilization, poo-poo the use of ritual and the use of intention in healing.
Yes, exactly. Because we don't understand that it's your attitude to something that makes such a big difference to it. And the modern day, they don't understand the role of the placebo. They don't realize that a placebo can actually heal somebody, because it's about the attitude towards it. So you don't even necessarily need the full dose or whatever to create a treatment. Whereas I do think the ancients did fully understand those things. I mean, the thing is, Rita, is you have to realize that we've undergone appalling historic changes that have taken us away from this knowledge. That's why my book kind of explores these things, to put them into an historical context, so you can understand how we lost all that understanding.
And I think as we move forward in the interview, we're going to definitely touch on some of that, because it is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had, in my opinion, 2,000 years nearly of brainwashing of having our knowledge bases destroyed, of being in a dark age. And now we are starting to reconnect with the ancient way of thinking, the ancient way of being, and some of the stuff that they knew. And I think it's really key to how we go forwards is reconnecting with that past.
But it seems, and I'll share this with you and the listeners, I've been doing a bunch of research for a new book I'm working on. And I've been reading a number of books that were written in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and I find it fascinating that these authors talk about the Native Americans, they talk about the Aborigines, they talk about these other cultures, and especially ones that were considered, they're called primitives or savages.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on why our advanced our quote unquote advanced culture would look at them this way?
I think that the thing that divides us is the fact that we've had over 2,000 and more years of living in cities. That's a key thing. So we think that living in cities is more advanced. So anybody like Native Americans who didn't build cities along the lines that I talk about in the book, which are very precise principles of civilization. I mean, I'm not talking about very well built kind of settlements. I'm talking about specifically designed, surveyed, set out, structured places that go back as far as 5,000 BC in Mesopotamia and are the precursor to Egypt. It's because we've had such a long time being exposed to that way of thinking that we tend to think that it's a superior form of living. Therefore, anybody who doesn't live like that. But what we don't realize is that some of the ways of thinking and the way of being actually link together Native Americans with the earliest origins of cities. Some of the rituals, some of the knowledge, some of the whole attitudes, the philosophy is the same, but we've lost that. We've had the impact from the Romans, from the church. All these things have actually changed our connections with the spirits and with the earth. So we no longer realize that there's any links between things like Native Americans and the earliest civilizers, the earliest city people.
Do you think being civilized is part of the human experience? For example, do you think it's inevitable, or do you think it's the inevitable next step of any civilization?
No, I don't. I don't think there's any. It's not innate. I don't think there's any inevitability about it at all. I think it's very attractive in some ways because the keynote of civilization, apart from the built environment, apart from these very deliberate structures called cities, the keynote is convenience, and you have to give up too much to allow that convenience to happen. And I think that there's plenty of research to show that health declined when people started to live in cities, that the health of the hunter-gatherers was better, for example. No, I think it was just a more persuasive, more powerful alternative. But I think there was no inevitability about it at all. And for a long time, this is why it's very important to look at the history of it, because for a long time, it was only in very small pockets that you had these advanced places. And it didn't grow that quickly. It took thousands of years for these ideas to take hold. But then in the end, for various reasons, it became an unstoppable thing.
In your research, could you find a reason, I guess would be the way to phrase it, as to why they started to build cities or communities with more permanent structures?
That is a really, really hard question to answer because it's not immediately apparent when the first thing happens. Because although everybody talks about the Golden Crescent, in northern Iraq. There's a ring of a curve of mountains that goes from the Taurus range of mountains in Turkey to the west, and these mountains go all the way around to the Zagros Mountains in Iran. And this is called the Fertile Crescent or the Golden Crescent, and it's where the earliest signs of civilization happen. It's where the earliest pottery happens, the earliest agriculture, the earliest metalwork, but no cities as such. But instead, I think that we're still very sophisticated elites who were involved in carrying out operations or having local people carry out operations for themselves. The cities themselves didn't appear for several thousand years later. I mean, those earliest dates are 8,000, 9,000 BC, and the cities don't appear until 5,000 BC. So by that time, maybe they had decided to set up trading places down near the Gulf of Persia, down in the southern part of Iraq, close to the sea. But who knows where they came from before that? Impossible. I couldn't find any firm evidence of anything, to be honest.
And I'm going to throw this out there. One of my new little fascinations has been Gobekli Tepe, which is in that area, and they're dating that to like 9,000 BC.
Yeah.
And I'm going, okay, so how does it just throws a giant monkey wrench into everything, because that is a well-defined structure before we even had agriculture.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly my point. Is that there are these, and that's in that part of southern Turkey. That's in that part of near the Taurus range of mountains that I was mentioning, and that's exactly the kind of thing that makes things very odd and not really make much sense. So yes, why did that come about at that time? It's not easy to say, but that's not in itself. Those early settlements, they weren't in themselves the cities. There was another place, Çatalhöyük, which is not hugely far away from Gobekli Tepe, which has got a very well organized structure to it in terms of storerooms and then people's living places around about. My sense of those places are that there's a whole chain of them, and there were these people called the Halafians, and I think that they built these sort of outposts as like a chain of communication, because they were using the mountains, particularly in that part of Turkey, for obsidian and other metals. So Gobekli Tepe could well have been part of that kind of whole process, definitely.
Let's kind of go into the whole topic of the development of civilization. In my research, and correct me if I'm wrong, agriculture actually started to appear in the mountains as opposed to the valley areas. And is the development of agriculture kind of the first signs of quote-unquote civilization, or is there actually something that we have done that put us more on that path to development?
Well, I think it all pretty much kind of coincides together, doesn't it? The earliest pottery, the earliest metalwork, the earliest agriculture. I mean, my sense of it is that the reason for the agriculture appearing where it does in the mountains is because if you've got groups who are doing work, you need to feed them, and that's why I think the agriculture happens there. Because even though they did modify some earlier cereals, their diet, for example, at Çatalhöyük and places, was still wild animals. It wasn't a totally move towards agriculture as we would understand it. I mean, the agriculture falls into two different distinct phases. That earliest phase where they penned up wild animals for meat and hides, and then the slight modification of the cereals. And the slight modification of the cereals is very interesting in itself, because I don't know, are you aware of what it is that makes a difference between domestic cereal and a wild cereal?
I know that they're different in size. The domestic is more robust, but that's about it.
Well, actually, the difference is really fascinating, because the difference is in terms of convenience. The point is about a wild cereal. If you take a head of barley, for example, there's lots of little seeds attached to the main stalk, and they're attached with like a hinge called the rachis. And in the wild version, that is brittle. So when the seed is ripe, it just bursts and spreads. The domesticated version waits to be picked, waits for the convenience. And the computer programs that they run in order to establish how long you'd have to wait to have sufficient crops show you'd have to wait a jolly long time, like 20 to 30 years to have sufficient, which makes me really suspicious that this was a deliberate change, because it's also very suspicious that it was convenience that was the outcome. It's not to do with taste, it's not to do with look or colour or anything like that. It's to do with this germination, to do with this fertility thing. And that makes me very suspicious that it wasn't a random episode. And the fact that it happens, as you say, in these mountainous areas, which were hostile areas. So I do think something very deliberate was happening. I don't think it was a chance outcome at all.
And I'm not sure if this is your area of expertise, but agriculture in South America didn't start much later than it did in that Fertile Crescent area, and they also started domesticating grains. And I find it fascinating that the same level of information, the same kinds of information were disseminating around the world all at the same time, or virtually at the same time.
Yeah, and also in South America, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where the modification was for convenience. You know, the goods changed colour so you could see them easier, and the corn likewise. You know, waited to be picked, and those exact same changes occurred. So absolutely, I think it's highly suspect. Do not think that these were evolutionary changes. I really don't.
And then it just takes me back to the question that in my mind of, but these people were savages living in little caves. You know, they just had little sticks and rocks. You know, why would they even think, or how could they know about modifying something in that way?
Well, I do think, I don't actually say this in the book because it's so it's so controversial. But I do think there were two different groups of people here. I think that there was an elite that knew what to do, that knew how to do this modification. And I do think that there were local people who carried out the work. And I don't think they had a clue what to do. I think they were told. I think they were given the cereals, given the crops, and given the work to do. That's my thinking. I mean, the way I explain it, it's like looking at the shanty towns in South Africa and saying, oh, because they watch television, they must have invented television. No, I don't think that possession proves invention at all. So that's my take on it. I do think there were some very clever people around in those very specific locations. And how much of a coincidence is it that it's mountains? And what do you find in mountains? You find minerals, you find metals, particularly gold. And that's one of the things that I really did pursue big time. And I think they knew what they were after, and they knew how to get it, and they knew how to find the people to help them do that work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's like I want to go somewhere, but I'm not. Because that'll just totally change our conversation.
But that earlier stuff is just so fascinating because nobody really questions it. They just assume, oh yes, agriculture, and then from agriculture you get marketplaces and throw a few seeds around. But it's not what the pattern shows. The pattern does not show that cities grow out of marketplaces. This is the really key thing. And then in the Mesopotamian area, in that southern Iraq part, when suddenly you get these cities arriving down by the coast, they are pre-planned from the start, these cities, and they coincide with a change in animals, with a domestication of animals, what's called the secondary products revolution, when suddenly a cow is sufficiently modified to be able to take milk from it. You can take wool from a sheep because its coat has changed from being like that of a deer. You can herd pigs. You can use oxen to plow. You can ride a horse. All these things happen all of a sudden, and they coincide with the arrival of these cities. And my thinking is that they happen because of cities and not the other way around. But we've sold ourselves on a completely different story, and so we've been looking through the wrong end of the telescope and have misunderstood all this ancient stuff. And we've missed a really good story. We've missed an amazing, fascinating thing as a result.
You bring up domestication of animals. One of the things I find fascinating is that other than the animals that in the current day we see as being domesticated, there have been no, as in zero, other animals domesticated.
Quite. I mean, isn't that, again, it's this theme of convenience. You know, it's always a thing that can provide milk, meat, hides, wool. You know, the alpaca is a kind of sheepy, goaty, modified thing. You know, this kind of thing. And it always works in mankind's favor. And people just haven't understood that. Also, the really fundamental thing about modification is if you want to breed a change, you have to breed it with something different. And as far as I understand it, nobody has worked out what was bred with what to change into something different. So that, again, to me, speaks of deliberate modification. Yeah, they used to think that the onager was the precursor to the donkey, and then they realized that wild onagers couldn't actually be domesticated. So how did that work? They can't work it out. They haven't, as far as I know, they haven't actually got back to the base, the baseline animals. And look at the variety that has come ever since. You know, all different kinds of horses, all different kinds of cattle. So yeah, I do think it's highly, highly suspicious.
But we still can't figure it out. We're so smart now.
Exactly.
We can't figure it out.
I mean, if I'm thinking about doing some more work on this area, I'm thinking that there's a huge story that's got to be stuck in the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's got to unravel this for us. I mean, somebody must have access to this information. It's just because it doesn't conform to our understanding that people, you know, obviously aren't looking at it. They just take everything for granted.
It's a secret, though. If they knew the answer.
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't want anyone to find out.
One of the other things that I find very interesting in many of the ancient texts is that it brings up the concept that we were taught agriculture. We were taught to make stone tools. We were taught. It wasn't we figured it out, but we were taught, which is a totally different concept.
Yeah, and also I completely agree. And also I looked at things like the fact that techniques don't change sometimes for thousands of years. You know, the same technique for making bricks or whatever, or some certain kinds of pottery, you know, are passed on from generation to generation. The other thing that should make people sit up is the fact that very often the earliest examples of these things are the highest quality, which in itself kind of implies that they have been taught. They've been taught a technique, and then it just gets passed on from family to family, because they often went down in specialist dynasties, you know, potters or whoever. And I mean, take pottery. They do say that once they started using the wheel, the quality of what they produced declined. So, you know, there are a lot of things that make one very suspicious. You can take other things like metalwork, the standardization that appears over huge distances, you know, would imply that these techniques were taught in different places to so many different people, but the same techniques. And in building construction work, things all face the same way and things like that. There are lots of very suspicious aspects to all of this.
Lucy, we need to go and take a quick break. And when we come back, this is a fascinating conversation, and let's talk a little bit about what happened after agriculture and kind of move along with history.
Sure.
Okay. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking with Lucy Wyatt about her book, Approaching Chaos. Her website is approachingchaos.co.uk, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.